Have you ever felt like your own hands were tearing down everything you've tried so hard to build, like right when love enters? You push it away right when hope knocks. You close the door right when you're about to rise. You vanish. And somehow, you keep calling that failure. But what if it's not failure? What if it's loyalty? To an old version of you that once believed hiding was safer than being seen, you're not self-destructing because you're broken. You're surviving. The only way you've ever known. And beneath that survival, there's a voice trembling asking, "Will you finally see me?" There's something I discovered, and it changed everything. Eli always felt it coming. That moment when the air shifted, when everything seemed almost too peaceful. It happened again last fall. Right after Claire whispered, "I feel safe with you." 3 days later, he left without saying goodbye. He told himself it was timing, that he wasn't ready, that love was too much. But deep down, he knew the pattern. Something inside him refused to let joy stay. He'd seen it before, job promotions. That he turned down last minute, big projects, abandoned halfway friendships. That he slowly stopped replying to every time something good walked in. A quiet voice inside him whispered, "Run," and he did, not dramatically, but in tiny ways. Canceling dinner, avoiding calls, shrinking just enough that the other person would leave first. It wasn't loud, it was subtle, invisible sabotage, the kind that looks like exhaustion, or being busy, or just not knowing what you want. But Eli knew. This was more than fear, it was something older, darker. Something that felt like it was trying to protect him, like a shadow that only showed up when the light got too bright. And that's when he realized, maybe he wasn't afraid of being alone, maybe he was afraid of what might happen if someone actually stayed and saw all of him, even the parts he'd hidden for decades, especially those. Because what if they did leave? What if they looked at his broken pieces and didn't flinch? That thought terrified him even more. It started in a basement. Eli was 6, the walls were damp, always smelled of earth and metal. He loved that space, until the night he cried too loudly. His father's footsteps echoed down the stairs. And then came the words, "Stop being so sensitive." That phrase carved something permanent inside him. He didn't know then that sensitivity could be sacred. All he learned was that it made love disappear, so he buried it year after year. He became quieter, less needy, less too much, until even his laughter sounded like permission-seeking. He remembers sitting alone, flashlight on, writing made-up stories to invisible friends. They were the only ones who didn't flinch when he felt deeply. That's where the shadow began, not as a monster, but as a shield, a loyal companion, born from rejection. Its job was simple: don't feel too much, don't ask for too much, don't love too loudly. Because every time he did, love punished him, not through violence, but through silence, and silence for a child is thunder. By the time Eli was 17, he had learned to disappear in plain sight. He laughed at the right moments, he performed joy, but inside, he was an echo, and that echo grew into a pattern, a whisper, a rule. If you want to be loved, hide what's real. It worked until he met Claire, because she didn't want the version of him he rehearsed. She wanted the one he'd hidden. And that's when the basement returned. Not the room, but the feeling, the same tightness in his chest, the same fear of being too much. Only this time, he stayed in the room. And for the first time in his life, he asked himself, what if the problem isn't that I feel too deeply? What if the problem is that I never let anyone meet the part of me that does? If that question lives inside you too, leave a small light in the comments, just a word, a whisper, so we know we're not alone in the dark. In his 20s, Eli was unstoppable. On paper, he graduated with honors, landed a tech job in Seattle, moved into an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows. And every year, he walked away from it all. He told friends it was burnout. But the truth was quieter, more slippery. It started with small doubts, little gut punches that came without warning. What if I don't actually deserve this? What if they're all just being polite? What if they find out I'm not enough? So he'd self-correct, withdraw, miss deadlines, make jokes to soften compliments, undermine praise before it could take root. No one noticed the pattern, but he did. Every time success knocked, he'd flinch, like a child expecting a slap. Instead of a hug, his therapist once asked, "What are you afraid might happen if everything goes right?" He didn't answer for a long time, but inside, something cracked open. He was afraid of being seen, not just noticed. Seen in all his messy truth, in all the ways he didn't fit the image, because somewhere deep down, he believed success would demand a version of him that wasn't real. And if he gave that version, it wouldn't last, because nothing fake ever does. So he chose failure, not loudly, but gently, quiet sabotage, a missed call here. And I'm just not feeling it there. Until the job, the person, the opportunity walked away on their own. It felt safer that way, less risky, more controlled. Eli wasn't afraid of losing. He was afraid of losing after being known. And maybe that's what self-sabotage really is, a form of mercy from the parts of us that don't believe we'll survive full exposure. But the cost was always intimacy, always belonging, always truth, and deep inside, he was starting to wonder, what if the thing I keep running from is the part of me that needs love the most? It happened during their third session. Eli sat across from Dr. Reeves, the quiet hum of the white noise machine behind her. He was explaining, again, how he always ruins things. Mid-sentence, she leaned in slightly. "Have you ever heard of the shadow?" He paused. "No," he said. She smiled gently. "Carl Jung described it as the part of us we reject, the parts we hide or disown. Not because they're evil, but because they didn't feel safe to be." Eli blinked. It sounded too poetic to be practical, but something in him leaned closer. Dr. Reeves continued, "When we don't acknowledge those parts, they don't disappear, they operate from underneath, silently, often through sabotage. And just like that, his world began to reframe. What if the version of him that pushes people away wasn't trying to ruin his life, but protect the little boy in the basement? What if the silence wasn't avoidance, but strategy? What if the shutdown wasn't dysfunction, but devotion? Eli sat in silence. A strange warmth crept in, not comfort, but recognition, like hearing your own name after forgetting it. He whispered, "So I'm not broken, Doctor." Reeves didn't answer right away. Then she said something that rewrote everything. "You're not broken, you're divided." And in that moment, a lifetime of guilt softened. He wasn't the enemy, he was the battleground, and somewhere within that war was a child who just wanted to be safe. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He kept replaying one thought: if my shadow is fighting this hard, maybe it's time I stopped fighting it back. Maybe I need to meet the part of me I've been afraid to love. It started with a notebook, the kind with thick paper and a leather cover that smelled like memory. Eli opened it, sat by his window, and wrote 3 words: "Dear Rage, hi." He wasn't sure what would come next. He didn't even know if it made sense. But Dr. Reeves had said, sometimes the only way to disarm a shadow is to give it a voice. So he wrote to rage, to shame, to fear. He didn't ask them to go away, he asked them to speak. Rage was first. It wrote back like fire. "I protected you when they mocked you. I stood between you and their silence." It wasn't polite, it was raw, ugly, but honest. Eli felt his hands tremble. He kept writing. Then came shame, quiet, like a child in the corner. "I didn't want you to be alone, so I made you small. That way, maybe they'd stay." Fear was last. She didn't yell, she whispered, "I warned you when love looked too much like the pain you used to know." Each part had its own voice, its own logic, its own wound, and none of them wanted to destroy him. They wanted to be seen. That realization cracked something inside for the first time. Eli didn't want to fix himself, he wanted to understand, and in that understanding, He felt the faintest hint of peace, not relief, but a kind of sacred stillness, the kind you feel when someone finally says, "I get it, except this time." He was saying it to himself. Each letter became a bridge from who he had been to who he was becoming, and with every page, his shadow softened, not because he forced it to, but because he listened, because he stayed, and staying was the bravest thing he'd ever done. Claire came over on a Sunday afternoon. They hadn't seen each other in weeks. Not because of distance, but because Eli had stopped answering her texts. He said he was busy, said he needed space, but she knew, and so did he. When she stepped inside, the air was different. She smiled, handed him a small bag of pastries. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. He nodded. They sat in silence, long enough for the tea to cool. Then she looked at him, direct, soft. "Illy, did I do something wrong?" His stomach turned, that question, the one he never knew how to answer, because the answer was always no, but it never felt that way inside. He stared at the floor. "No," he said, "you didn't do anything." Claire leaned back, then nodded, and for a moment, nothing moved but inside Eli. Everything did. The shadows stirred, the old rules screamed, "Pull away, say you're not ready, say it's not the right time, say anything to get out," but he didn't. He stayed, and in the silence that followed, a new voice whispered, one that wasn't fear, one that wasn't rage. It said, "You don't have to run this time." Still, his hands shook. He felt himself slipping into old rhythms, looking for reasons to sabotage, to vanish, to burn the bridge before it could carry too much weight. But Claire was still there, still kind, still present, and that made it harder, because if she stayed, he'd have to be real, and real was the most dangerous thing he'd ever known. So he reached for a sentence. Any sentence. But none came, just breath, just presence, and for now, that was enough. Claire didn't press him. She just waited. Eli sat on the edge of the couch, unsure where to put his hands. She reached out, not to hold him, but to place her palm face up. Between them, an invitation, no urgency, no demand, just space. He didn't take it. But he didn't walk away either. That's when she spoke. "Illy, I know you disappear when it gets close. I don't need you to explain it. I just want to know, are you still here?" His eyes welled up, not because of guilt, but because no one had ever asked the question like that before. Most people said, "What's wrong with you?" Or worse, "Why are you like this?" But Claire asked from the middle, from the place that didn't want to fix or flee, just witness. And in that witnessing, something opened. Eli looked at her, really looked, not through the lens of performance or shame, but with the rawness of being known. He whispered, "I'm trying." She nodded once. "I see that." And somehow, that simple exchange felt bigger than any apology. It was a moment without armor, no fixing, no begging, just two people, sitting with the weight of truth. He still felt the shadow inside him, still felt the fear. But it wasn't alone anymore for the first time. Someone saw it too, and didn't run, didn't recoil, didn't shrink back. She stayed. Not to rescue him, but to remind him that presence can be its own kind of love, that maybe you don't have to be fully healed to be fully seen. The next morning, Eli walked to the park near his apartment. The trees were still dripping from last night's rain. He sat on a bench, notebook in hand, but this time, he didn't write to his shadow. He wrote with it, not "Dear Rage," not "Dear Fear," just, "Today, we walked together." It wasn't poetic, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Integration, Dr. Reeves had said, isn't about erasing the shadow. It's about letting it sit beside you, without letting it steer. So that's what Eli practiced. He walked, he breathed. He noticed the parts of him that still flinched at joy, still wanted to turn down invitations, still hesitated when Claire smiled too warmly. But instead of silencing those parts, he named them, not to fix, but to make room. He remembered a memory, age 11, standing on stage, forgetting his lines during the school play, laughter, not cruel, but sharp enough to scar. He had tucked that moment deep, let shame hold it for years. Now he revisited it, not to rewrite it, but to say, I get why you stayed hidden. He whispered that in the park, to no one, and yet, it felt heard. Each step he took after that was slower, more deliberate, less urgent. He wasn't racing toward healing anymore. He was unfolding into it, and with every breath, the shadow began to shift. No longer an enemy, no longer just a protector, but a partner, learning, just like him, how to walk in daylight. And as he passed a little boy feeding pigeons by the fountain, Eli smiled, not because everything was okay, but because, for once, it didn't have to be. The door inside him didn't slam shut this time, it stayed open, just wide enough for light to enter. 3 weeks later, Eli almost vanished again. Claire had invited him to a dinner with her friends, nothing dramatic, just wine, conversation, a soft evening. But as the hour approached, that old voice returned. They'll see you, not your charm, not your intellect, you, the unedited version. And that felt unbearable. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tie in hand, heart racing. He reached for his phone, started typing the text. Hey, I'm not feeling great, rain check. His thumb hovered over send, but something stopped him. A breath, a memory, a bench in the rain. A whisper he'd written weeks ago. Today we walk together. So he looked at the reflection in front of him and saw not just the fear, but the boy behind it, still holding that moment on the stage, still trembling, still loyal. He didn't yell at him, didn't banish him. He nodded. I know you're scared, but we're going anyway. And somehow, that made the mirror softer. That night he showed up, hands sweaty, voice uncertain, but he showed up. The conversations weren't perfect. He laughed too loudly once, fumbled a story, felt exposed, but he didn't run, and that was new. Because integration isn't the absence of discomfort, it's the willingness to stay while discomfort speaks. It's not always peaceful, it's messy, raw, awkward, but inside that chaos lives a different kind of trust, not in the world, not in outcomes, but in self. And as Eli walked home under a cloudy sky, he realized something strange. He felt tired, but not heavy. He felt stretched, but not shattered. Like his heart was growing into a shape it had never known. And somehow, it fit. Eli sat by the window that evening, notebook in his lap. Outside, the sky was soft, blushing into dusk. He turned to the last page, not because the journey was over, but because something needed to be said. He wrote slowly, Dear Shadow, thank you, not for the pain, not for the chaos, but for the protection, for the loyalty, for staying all these years. Even when I didn't want to see you, you weren't the enemy, you were the echo of every time I felt too much, too loud, too tender, and you just wanted to make sure I never felt that alone again. But now, I can hold you, not hide you, not worship you, just hold. Eli closed the notebook, breathed. Claire texted, Made extra tea if you're up for a walk. He smiled, typed back, On my way. No hesitation, no story, no escape route, just presence. He grabbed his coat, stepped outside, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he had to armor up, because healing didn't mean he was perfect. It meant he was whole, not fixed, not polished, just whole. He walked through the quiet streets, shadow at his side, not following, not leading, but walking, in step. If this journey found something familiar in you, if there's a part of you that's tired of running, you're not alone, you never were, and maybe this is your beginning too.